Resins Opaque Castable 3D Printer Resin. Let's give it a semi-review. Hey guys, from the beginning, let's not beat about the bush here. Resin products are not cheap, with a 1 kilogram bottle costing a whopping $300. So it's hardly surprising that Resins sent me their smallest bottle to look over, and even this costs $100. And don't be fooled by the size of the bottle. My guess is that it's only half full. As I don't have a lot of material to play with, reviewing this thoroughly isn't really possible, but we can have a good go. From previous reviews, I know that Resins make some beautiful stuff, so I'd expect nothing less from Opaque. Just look at the claims. 100% ash-free burnout. Safe and not smelly, which is a big bonus on its own. Compatible with DLP, LED and LCD printers. No need for post-UV curing, which will come in handy today. And accurate to 0.1 millimeters, which is what I'm really going to be testing in this video. A few weeks ago, you may have seen me having a bash at casting in one take an articulated dragon print, with pretty fair results I think. Well, since then, I've been wanting to have a go at something similar of my own. There was no way I could design something attractive and functional at this end of the learning curve, so I had in mind a boxy 1950s style robot. And I don't mind admitting, the concept of articulation on a 3D print strained my tiny brain considerably, and much smoke came from my ears as I played with ideas. This was my first mock-up, just the arms, head and torso. It printed successfully in one go and had the small amount of movement that I was looking for. My next mock-up was fully formed. He was small, cute and boxy, but I felt that I wanted him a little bit smoother. So I turned to ZBrush to round over the edges and add a tiny bit of personality. I thought he'd make a great keychain, and so I incorporated a ring into the design. It printed great, and most importantly, it moved. Then, as changing my mind is nothing new, I decided to scrap the ring but leave the hole. To preserve the movement, the various sections would need to be printed and cast rigidly in place. So I again used ZBrush to design a sprue system to fully support the piece. I supported this using Lychee, and to test if my support system worked properly, I printed it, and was delighted to see that the test print was a success. Now, I just needed to cast it. You may think this is a waste of good castable resin, but this is a very worthy print and cast test. Some of the hinging pieces are less than 1 millimeter thick and need to be surrounded by an air gap of a similar size. This means printing accuracy is critical, and for that reason I opted to use my Frozen Sonic Mini 8K. The other major resin issue here is that the hinge sections are largely hidden inside the model. That means UV curing them after printing is very difficult. But Resins Opaque does not need UV curing after printing, so it should be ideal. So I just needed to print the piece, and I looked on the Resins website for setting details. I was initially delighted to see plenty of printers listed, but unfortunately I very quickly realised that these support pages were very out of date. Finding a 4K printer is difficult enough, never mind 8K printers. And so here I must express my disappointment with Resins. For me, a $300 bottle of resin without any printing instructions is basically an expensive paperweight. Now, this is not a new gripe for me. Many of you may recall how I took Bluecast to task over this exact same issue, and I have to commend them on how well they rose to the challenge. Now, finding information and getting support on their website is an absolute pleasure. And this is the way all resin companies should work. Okay, I'll admit I can't see any 8K printers here either, but the 8Ks are pretty new, and I certainly hope that Bluecast are on the case. So if you're listening, Power Resins, please update these pages. Frankly, you shouldn't sell a product without giving your customers the knowledge they need to use it properly. Anyway, with that grumble aside, I was left with only a small sample of resin and no clue about settings. So I took a plunge and guessed at these, whilst printing the Frozen XP test print. To my utter delight, it printed very well. However, I'm not sure Power Resins quite understand the meaning of opaque. It looks semi-transparent to me, but admittedly not as transparent as their burn. Feeling hopeful, I added an extra 0.5 seconds to the layer height time and took a plunge at printing the whole thing. Initially it seemed fine, but a closer look showed that a number of the supports had pulled free and some sections of the print hadn't formed properly. That meant it was a waste of expensive resin. I added more supports just for good measure, added another 0.5 seconds to the layer height time and tried again, thankfully with success. The instructions on the bottle recommend washing for 2 minutes in an ultrasonic cleaner before blasting dry with air. For those of you that have seen my print cleaning guide video, you'll recall seeing my cheap mini air compressor, which works great for this. I used the Frozen Sabre ultrasonic knife to trim away the thin contact tips of the supports, and I'll talk more about this device in a dedicated video in a few days. I used clippers at the thicker end of the supports, and here I noticed that the resin was firm but not brittle, cutting easily and cleanly without snapping. Another wash in the ultrasonic cleaner is then suggested, along with another blast of dry air, leaving the print ready for casting. As a whole, I'm quite pleased with the print. I'm not convinced I've got the settings right, so I'll forgive small imperfections like those on the face and the chest. I decided not to tidy them up with sandpaper, but for testing I'll use the scrap print and test sandpaper there. Yes, it sands well. Here of course I also printed my sprues, so I'll use the same scrap piece and test it with wax sprues. Yes, it seems to accept wax sprues nicely, so it's on to the casting. Power Resins say their opaque is easy to cast and doesn't require any special or out of the ordinary approach. So I just did what I usually do. That's looking okay. Now, I'm not known for being overly patient, and any sensible person would use a jeweler's saw and slowly cut away the sprues. But I'm lazy and more than a bit daft, so the angle grinder was my choice of tool. Not a good idea. this arm hasn't been cut free. I think the sheer force of vibration broke free this very thin section. Still, the whole thing is just an experiment, so no harm done. A plunge in the ultrasonic cleaner should remove the hidden plaster, and it did, but it took 3 hours. At this point, I was scared. My little one-arm bandit seemed pretty good. Every limb had movement, except the waist, which had frozen solid. It's a shame, but not altogether unexpected when you're dabbling with new design concepts. And because of the problem with the angle grinder, I was terrified about cleaning it up. As it was brown trousers time, this was as much cleanup as I'd risk. There are some flaws in the casting, but these were pretty much present in the original print, and I of course opted not to try and clean those up. With better settings, I would expect better results, but still, this was an accurate casting, with hinge pieces around 3/4 mm thick, which is both fine printing and fine casting. So what do I think about Power Resins Opaque? Well, I think I've managed to prove Power Resin's claims to be true. It's more semi-transparent than opaque, but it prints dimensionally well. It may even print perfectly if the ideal settings are available. But here I feel that my print had great accuracy. It must do to achieve this level of articulation. It casts perfectly, without any issues that I noticed, and even me, a self-confessed amateur, is able to create something unusual like this thanks to the curing, printing and casting properties of this resin. In short, it's a good product, probably aimed more at the professional than the home market, but one that lives up to its claims. So that's it for this review, guys. Take care and thanks for watching.